Hey everyone, it's Jackson from JackZon Quilts. Today I'm going to teach you how to machine bind your quilt, and I will be working on one of mine that I recently finished quilting. So let's get started. Okay, let's take a look at the tools that I'm going to be using during this tutorial. First of all, I love the Somo mini clips. I will be using a 2.5 inch square ruler with a diagonal marking. Straight edge ruler is also helpful. Binding gizmo. Nice quality pair of scissors, Soline glue pen with a refill. For a bigger quilt, get an additional refill. A marking pen that's removable. Glass head pins. These are great as you can actually iron over them and you don't melt the pin onto the fabric. Of course, an iron and an ironing surface. Okay, so here I'm just stitching along the edge of the quilt, a little less than 1/8 of an inch in all the way around. All right, as we can see here, I have trimmed away the excess backing and batting to the edge of the quilt. Now, if your quilt had points that were 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, I would encourage trimming 1/8 of an inch away to allow the binding to nest up and make them look nice without cutting the points off. Right, let's work out how much fabric we need and how many strips of binding we need to cut. First, add up all 4 sides of the quilt and add an extra 10 inches. In this case, it comes to 258 inches. I'll then divide that by 40, which is the width of my strips that I am cutting, and that gets me 6.45. Round up to the nearest whole number. In this case, it will be 7. Always round up. So now I know I need 7 strips. So I'm going to cut 7 2.5 inch strips. To work out the fabric needed for that, I simply go 7 times 2.5 to get that amount. I will now cut this into my strips. All right, now it's time to join our 2.5 inch strips we've previously cut. One thing I will note is I have squared off the ends so that they are nice and neat and tidy. And I'm going to place that right sides together like so, one running one way, one going the opposite. I'm then going to proceed to fold back the top corner like so, and I will press that on a 45-degree angle. I'm going to place that back on top there and get my pins, and I am going to pin this in place. Come along with your ruler and just draw a line along that crease. Next up, stitch along. Once you have stitched along that line, grab your scissors and just cut approximately 1/4 of an inch away. Now that I've joined all my seams, I'm going to press the seam open. This helps reduce bulk, and I will proceed to iron these in half, like so. Now I'm going to take the binding gizmo and I'm going to fold it through the slots and proceed to wind my binding up. Okie dokie, now it's time to attach the binding to the quilt. I sew it on the back and then I'll take it over to the front. I come in about 6 inches from the corner, if not a bit more. And then from that point there, I come along about 10 inches. And I've got a seam guide on my machine. And I'm going to align the edge of the quilt and the edge of the binding together and nest that up against my seam guide. Now I have set it to be a little bit extra than 1/4 inch seam allowance. As I'm sewing my binding, I will actually align the edge of the quilt and binding up against that, and it helps me keep a consistent seam allowance. If your machine doesn't have a seam guide like I'm using, you can place a piece of masking tape down, and when you're sewing along, align the edge of the quilt and binding towards the edge of the masking tape, like so, and stitch the binding down to the corner. Okay, as I approach the corner, I'm going to get my little square ruler and I'm going to align that diagonal line with one edge of the quilt And the corner of the ruler I'm going to have sit at the edge of the quilt. Next, I'm going to mark the diagonal line like so. Set that aside. And now I'll proceed to sew along. And I'm going to come to that line that I marked, reverse, and cut my threads. Next, I'm going to fold the binding back on a 45-degree angle. And I finger press that. So it will look like this. Then I proceed to fold it back over, where this fold will align with the edge of the previous side. To help hold this in place, I'm going to use one of the Somo mini clips. That holds it in place so I can easily rotate the quilt. Hold that, remove the clip, lower it under my machine's foot. I like to start a little bit in from the edge, then I'll reverse, take one stitch off the edge, and then I'll proceed to stitch it down the next side. I'll proceed to repeat that step for the remaining 3 corners. Okie dokie, so I have stitched all my corners and I got to the last one and I've stitched about 4 inches and then stopped. So I have a tail, and now we're going to join these two with a little bit of stitching magic. To do that, I'm going to first just cut a random piece off the tail. Now, I'm looking here, and this is the section that's unsewn, and the rough middle of that is around here. So I'm going to go a little bit this side and cut that edge off so that then sits square. Next, that piece that I had previously snipped off the tail, I'm going to place that on top from the edge of that tail. Proceed to lay the other side on. And I'm just going to smooth that over just so I know it's going to sit flush. Now, on the opposite edge of that piece, I am going to cut my binding eyeball square, like so. Now we need to join these on a 45-degree angle. So to do that, it's quite simple. I am going to fold, move this out of the way, fold that corner over to create our 45-degree angle, get my iron, and I am going to iron that down. Once that's done, I'm going to place that on top, open them both out, place that on top, and grab a pin and secure it like so. We'll move this out of the way. For this we will get a pin, and I'm going to pinch the quilt top together like so and put a pin in there. This is holding the quilt so that now these pieces can be better aligned. What I will proceed to do is move that pin, better align, and place that pin back in place. And I'm going to get my marking tool, come along, and I'm going to mark the diagonal. As you can see, I've looked underneath. We will now proceed to stitch on that diagonal marking there. I'm going to remove the pin. Now that's stitched, I will remove the pin from previously. Before I do any cutting, I do check that it's actually going to sit correctly. Come along and trim approximately 1/4 inch away from the edge. And I grab the iron and I'm going to iron that open, and then I'm just going to iron that flush again. I will now continue to sew the remainder of my binding on. Okay, once you've sewn your binding all the way around the quilt, come along, give it a little press, and then proceed to roll that edge over. In the corner, just poke your iron tip into there and don't give it much more stress than that. We will sort that out on the flip side. Rightio, we've stitched it down and we've ironed it over. Now, when we stitched it, we stitched clockwise. However, when we're turning it over, we're going to be working anti-clockwise, which will help reduce the bulk in our corners and even it out. To start off, I'm going to use my glue pen and just apply gentle dabs inside from the fold on that binding. On that corner, I'm just going to roll it around just to apply a nice amount. Next up, I'm going to grab that edge and fold it over like so, nesting it against the edge of the quilt top. And I'm going to press it with my iron to help set it. That excess glue in that corner has helped get that to sit down quite nicely. Next up, get the mini clips. These are so damn helpful for this. And put a couple of those in place to hold down that edge. Okay, now we're going to come along here. Again, a couple of dabs of glue. Let me wind it up to get some more. Dabbity, 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 doo da da, doink, doink, doink. All right, I'm going to get a pin and I'm going to align that pin with the edge of that quilt top and fold that over. Using the pin really helps tuck that in and gets it to sit beautifully, so we can just come along and iron it over like so. Again, get the awesome mini clips out. I always put one on the corner. It holds that in place 100%. I've got my clips holding it in place. I'm going to come to the machine and I'm going to begin to top stitch along that edge. Stopping before I get to the clips and popping them away. Okay, as we come into a corner, all I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch nice and slowly. I'm going to needle down, pivot on that corner, rotate my quilt and sew along the next side. It's really that simple. By having it glued, it just helps it hold it nicely in place. All right, and there you go. It is now bound. I am over the moon with how it's come up. Just check that out. So, if you enjoyed this tutorial, please like, comment, subscribe, all of that cool social stuff. And follow me along under JackZon Quilts. That's Jackson with a Z. I'll put that right here. And yeah, keep on creating. Enjoy the chaos and have a stitching good day. Bye for now.